Once upon a time, in a small town known for its delicious cakes and pastries, there was a renowned bakery owned by an old, kind-hearted lady named Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Baker was famous for her scrumptious cakes, and people came from far and wide just to taste her cakes. Every year, there was a baking contest held in the town, and Mrs. Baker always won the first prize. One day, as Mrs. Baker was preparing for the contest, she realized that her secret recipe for the famous chocolate cake was missing. She searched everywhere but couldn't find it. She was devastated and couldn't imagine competing without her secret recipe. The town was in chaos, and everyone was talking about the missing recipe. It was the talk of the town. The news of the missing recipe reached the ears of a detective rabbit named Thumper. Thumper was known for his excellent detective skills and had solved many cases in the past. Thumper was eager to take on the case and promised Mrs. Baker that he would catch the culprit before the baking contest began. Thumper began his investigation by asking Mrs. Baker questions about the missing recipe. Mrs. Baker told him that she had kept the recipe in a safe, but someone had broken into her bakery and stole the recipe. Thumper knew that he had to find the thief before it was too late. Thumper began his investigation by questioning the people in town. He went to the local market and asked the vendors if they had seen anyone suspicious buying chocolate or baking ingredients. He even went to the local cafe and asked the customers if they had overheard anyone talking about the missing recipe. Days went by, and Thumper was no closer to finding the thief. He had questioned everyone in town but had no leads. However, he didn't give up. He knew that there was a clue out there that could help him solve the case. One day, Thumper went to the town's library and began researching famous cake recipes. He read about a similar recipe in a cookbook from a neighboring town. Thumper knew that this was a clue and decided to visit the neighboring town. As soon as Thumper arrived in the town, he went to the local bakery and asked if they knew anything about the missing recipe. The baker told him that a man had come to their bakery a few days ago and had bought a lot of chocolate and baking ingredients. Thumper knew that this was his chance to catch the thief. Thumper followed the trail of the suspect and ended up at a small house on the outskirts of town. He knocked on the door, and a man answered. Thumper asked him if he knew anything about the missing recipe, but the man denied knowing anything about it. However, Thumper noticed that the man had chocolate stains on his shirt and hands. He also noticed a cookbook on the kitchen counter that had a similar recipe to Mrs. Baker's famous chocolate cake. Thumper knew that he had found the culprit. The man confessed to stealing the recipe and said that he wanted to win the baking contest. Thumper arrested the thief and took him back to town to face justice. Mrs. Baker was overjoyed when she heard the news that the thief had been caught. She was grateful to Thumper for solving the case and promised to make him a cake in his honor. The town was relieved that the recipe had been found, and the baking contest could go ahead as planned. On the day of the baking contest, Mrs. Baker won the first prize once again, and everyone in town celebrated. Thumper was hailed as a hero, and people praised him for his excellent detective skills. From that day on, the town was a safer place, and people felt more secure knowing that Thumper was always on the lookout for any. Do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel that do not miss new stories about the adventures of the brave rabbit detective Thumper.